Candace, I've come to ask you for a favor. I can't work with this arm, and I'm currently on leave from my part-time job. Without working, I don't get paid, and life is tough. Could you possibly lend me some money for living expenses? My husband and mother-in-law made false claims and demanded money from me. I believed them and wanted to help, so I provided the money as they requested. However, my husband was having an affair, and my mother-in-law was indulging in gambling, using the money I had struggled to gather for their entertainment. I felt pathetic beyond words when faced with this betrayal. When I confronted them with the facts, they reacted with outrage. Unable to bear it any longer, when I decided to divorce, they insulted me. If you get divorced, you'll never be able to marry again. You're just a junior high school graduate. Now we'll be free from the unpleasant daughter-in-law. I don't mind if you divorce. Faced with my husband and mother-in-law's ruthless comments, I felt that divorce alone was not a solution. I couldn't forgive this betrayal. I planned to make them pay for the suffering they caused me. My name is Candace. I am 25 years old, and it has been 3 years since I got married. My husband, Peter, works at an apparel shop. We met when he visited the family restaurant where I was working as a part-time waitress. Have you been working here long? Yes, for about 5 years now. You've been here a long time? I always see you, so I feel familiar. Would you like to go somewhere with me next time? Surprised by his unexpected invitation, I accepted it. Having had no deep interactions with the opposite sex and living a lonely life, my heart wanted to experience youthful days. I grew up with my mother, as my father had already left us following an affair that led to my parents' divorce. My mother was a single mom and couldn't afford luxuries, but she did everything she could for me. When it was time for me to advance to high school, my mother fell ill and couldn't work, so I gave up studying and decided to support our household with my part-time job. A few years later, I met my husband, an older man. He seemed mature and was attractive to me. He took me to various places, and each time I was touched. Where shall we go next time? The seaside is nice, and a spa trip would be fun?
Right.
Since I hadn't experienced much, such plans were very fresh and exciting. My husband always invited me to new worlds, like a prince out of a storybook. Enchanted by the illusion of an ideal life, I decided to marry him just 6 months after we started dating. My mother warned me that it was too early to marry, but perhaps out of guilt for not being able to let me fully enjoy my youth, she didn't oppose it too strongly. My mother had fully recovered and resumed her previous job. My husband was also the only son from a single-parent family, which may have played a role in our decision to marry. When I first met my mother-in-law, she was very pleasant and kind, but I somehow felt uneasy and developed an aversion to her. I discussed this issue with my husband. Don't worry about it. I was also nervous when I first met your mother. You'll get used to it over time. If there's a problem, I'll support you, so don't worry. His comforting words calmed my heart. However, at that point, I still did not understand his true character. After we got married, we bought a condo. Rather than paying rent every month, it's smarter to buy a condo and pay for the mortgage. It will ultimately become an asset. That's true. Since you, Candace, have more work experience than me, it'll be easier for the mortgage to get approved in your name. Then let's do that. I was genuinely happy to be able to live with my husband and followed his suggestion without any doubt. When we started our life together, I was asked to take on night shifts at work. I'm the type who can't say no, so I reluctantly agreed. As a result, despite being newlyweds, Our time together was almost non-existent. One holiday, our days off coincided, and we were relaxing at home. "Hey, I'm sorry to ask this, but could you lend me some money?" "What happened? Why do you suddenly need money?" My husband started explaining with a serious look. "The sales at the store have dropped, and my salary has been cut. I couldn't tell you right away. That must have been tough. I'll pay you back once my salary is back to normal." "Understood. But we're a couple, so there's no need to strain yourself." "Sorry, do you still have savings?" "Yes, just a little. But don't worry, I'm making more with the night shifts. I'll cover for you, Peter. That really helps." However, I continued to support my husband financially, and I eventually lost track of how much I had lent him. Originally, there should have been no problem, but suddenly my mother-in-law visited. "Susan, what brings you here?" I noticed the bandage wrapped around her arm and asked in surprise. "Candace, I fell down the stairs and broke my right arm." "Oh, are you okay? Have you talked to Peter about this?" "No, I don't want to worry him unnecessarily, so I haven't told him yet." "I see. It must be hard to stand and talk here. Please come inside." We sat down in the living room and began our conversation. "Candace, I've come to ask you for a favor. I can't work with this arm, and I'm currently on leave from my part-time job. Without working, I don't get paid, and life is tough. Could you possibly lend me some money for living expenses?" "Me? Yes, there are circumstances I can't discuss with Peter. You're the only one I can ask, Candace. If there are circumstances she can't discuss with Peter, then it can't be helped." I decided to give her $2,000 for living expenses, in the hope that lending money to her would improve our relationship a bit. I had been giving the extra money from my night shifts to my husband, so I had no choice but to take out money from my savings to give to my mother-in-law. This was honestly quite difficult. Even when I was tired, I tried to minimize expenses by cooking for myself and preparing lunch for my husband regularly, and sometimes I just ate instant food or skipped meals altogether. During such a frugal period, while cleaning the house, I found an unfamiliar strand of blonde hair. It clearly wasn't mine or my husband's. I was greatly disturbed. This could only be a sign of my husband having an affair, and it seemed he had brought someone into our home while I was at work. I was distraught and desperately searched for more evidence of his cheating. Then, I found a pay slip. Checking how much his salary had been cut, I discovered that there had been no reduction at all. In fact, it was higher than the amount he had previously mentioned to me. I was shocked twofold by my partner's infidelity and the deceit about his salary. Not knowing whom to turn to for advice, I headed to my mother-in-law's house. Thinking about the money I had lent her, I was convinced that my mother-in-law would be on my side. As I approached her house, I couldn't believe my eyes. My mother-in-law emerged from a casino. "Susan, what are you doing here?" She looked a bit startled, but asked calmly, "Huh? Candace, why are you here? I came to talk to you." "But you were playing slots. Being alone at home gets depressing. So I was just taking a little break." "But you're supposed to be out of money."
Right.
"I only used a little." "That money is the money I lent you, isn't it?" "No, it was just a little left over from my last paycheck. I'm using the money you lent me gratefully for this month's living expenses." I couldn't believe her, but the issues with my husband were more severe, so I avoided further probing. "Candace, I ended up having to take leave from work for the rest of the month, so I will have no salary next month. Could you possibly lend me some money for next month's living expenses?" Her lies were evident. She no longer had a brace on her right arm. Yet, I made a deliberate decision to lend her money to maintain a favorable position with her. Of course. But can we talk for a bit? Thank you, Candace. You really are understanding. It's such a relief. She was pleased, and we immediately proceeded to her house. Once inside, I told her everything about my husband. Men always cheat. I experienced a lot when I was young. Why don't you try fighting back, Candace? Her inappropriate suggestion shocked me. As for the money, I'm not too sure. I haven't spoken to Peter recently. But maybe watch a bit longer? He'll surely pay everything back at once. Her irresponsible comment left me speechless. So, can I borrow the money for next month's living expenses today? I have some payments coming up. What? Today? Could you come back in a week at night? That's fine. A week later was my day off, and I planned to confront my husband in front of my mother-in-law then. A week later, the day arrived. I eagerly awaited my husband and mother-in-law at our home, and she arrived first. Candace, I'm here. Susan, please come in. It's okay right here. I'll leave as soon as I get the money. I shouldn't overstay my welcome in a newlywed's home. She stated this hesitantly, but her true interest was clearly just the money. It seems her desire to see her son had also faded. Susan, you no longer need that arm brace, do you? Then there should be no problem meeting Peter. He'll be back soon, so please wait in the living room. I'll give you the money secretly so that Peter doesn't know, so don't worry. Yes, I might as well see Peter after a long time. I invited her over to use her to confront my husband. If she leaves now, the plan falls through. If she's using me, I need to use her to protect myself. She quietly sat in the living room drinking coffee, seeming uncomfortable with the idea of staying long. Then my husband returned home. On my days off, he always returned home at a specific time, as if to implicitly claim he's not cheating. I'm home. Welcome back. Your mother is here too. Peter, it's been a long time. Mom, what are you doing here so late? Just came to see how you and Candace are doing. Really? That's unusual. First, sit down. I'll prepare some coffee. I made coffee, and the three of us sat down in the living room. Despite it being a rare reunion, my husband and mother-in-law barely spoke. Even if there was nothing to talk about, such silence was unusual. It seems their interest in each other had faded. However, this silence provided me an environment conducive to bringing up the main topic. Actually, there's something I need to confirm with you. Since your mother is here, I'd like her to hear it too. What do you want to ask? At that moment, I took out the strand of blonde hair and showed it to them. What is this? Peter suddenly changed his color. I don't know, maybe it's someone else's hair. He was clearly irritated. I found this when I was cleaning your room. Well, I deal with many people at work, so it must have stuck to my clothes. I resolved to ask him directly. Are you cheating on me? What? Of course not. Are you doubting me just because of that? It's not just the hair. There are other pieces of evidence too. I intentionally tested him. In fact, there was no other evidence. However, I intuitively felt that he was being unfaithful, though baselessly. What other evidence do you have? Be specific. I found it inconvenient to be pursued, so I quickly changed the subject. Also, your salary hasn't been cut, has it? I found the pay slip while cleaning. Why are you looking at that without permission? First, I want the money I've lent you so far back. Why all of a sudden? You know I can't pay it back. Didn't you say yourself not to strain ourselves because we're family? I didn't lend you money so you could use it for cheating. I'm not using it for cheating. So, you admit to cheating. That's a dirty trick. Your method. Ultimately, Peter had been unfaithful. Any remaining affection I had for him had disappeared. Ignoring Peter's reaction, I focused on his mother. Susan, if I can't collect the money from Peter, I can't lend you any. Candace, that's not fair. I came all this way for the money. That's cruel. Clearly, both Peter and his mother were only thinking of themselves. It seemed no problem to them that the son was borrowing money from his wife without the mother's knowledge, or that he was having an affair. Perhaps these two saw marriage as an opportunity to use me. I was preparing to make a decision as the situation worsened. I can no longer live with you. I am filing for divorce. Peter and his mother could not hide their surprise at these words. If you divorce, you'll never be able to marry again. So, you've always looked down on me like that? Yes, because you're just a junior high graduate. How does educational background affect marriage? Despite expecting such a reaction, Peter's insults shook me. Candace, calm down. Susan, you only want my money, right? That's not true. I can't lend you any more money. I also need you to return the $2,000 I lent you before. What will you do? My mother-in-law wore an indescribable expression. If that's the case, fine. I have no further business here, so I was just an ATM to you after all. My mother-in-law sighed as if she was fed up. I'll finally be free from this unpleasant daughter-in-law. I don't mind if you divorce. She suddenly changed her tone and expressed her displeasure. Peter appeared uninterested, looking at his cell phone. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. With those words, I left the pre-prepared divorce papers in front of Peter. You had this prepared. I've already filled out my part. It just needs your signature. I'll come to pick it up tomorrow. Peter and his mother looked at the divorce papers expressionlessly. Without saying anything, I hurried out of the house and went straight to my parents' house. I'm back. What happened? Why are you alone at this late hour? Mom, it seems I rushed into marriage. I should have listened to your advice. What exactly happened? I explained everything to my mother. So that's what was happening. I should have opposed it more. I'm really sorry. No, but I'm not just going to end it with a divorce. I'll definitely get back the money I lent them, and I'll seek appropriate compensation. But do you have evidence of his infidelity and debt? It's okay. I felt that it might turn out this way today, so I recorded all our conversations earlier. I proudly showed the recorder to my mother. Thinking of that, you're quite something. Yes, sadly, my prediction came true. I'll consult a lawyer tomorrow. Indeed, you can't let what happened just pass. If there's anything I can help with, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, Mom. Is it okay if I stay here for a while? Of course. This is your home. I really appreciate it. That night I couldn't sleep, filled with humiliation and disappointment. The next day I went to my house to retrieve the signed divorce papers and check that Peter had signed them. Immediately after, I went to the condo management company to proceed with the sale. Fortunately, since the title was in my name, the process went smoothly. I had no intention of living in that house any longer and felt no need to inform Peter. The property was mine, bought and paid for by me. There was no reason to let my estranged husband live there anymore. Concurrently, I hired movers to remove the household items, all of which I had purchased and therefore owned. A few days after the move, my husband called, shocked to find the house empty. "What's going on?" "The TV and fridge, everything's gone. Since I paid for everything myself, why should I leave them there for you? Never set foot in this house again. Your belongings are no longer here." His response was as predictable as it was agitated. However, the matter was far from over. A few days later, it seemed the condo manager had visited my husband. Then he called again. "What are you doing? Why did you sell the condo? You took the TV too, didn't you?" "That house is mine. The condo was in my name, and I made all the payments. It's only natural for me to sell it since I no longer plan to live there." "Don't be stupid. Where am I supposed to live now?" "That's not my problem. Why don't you go live with your affair partner?" "This isn't a joke. I won't forgive you." His words sounded lawless. How could he think to continue living in a condo he never paid for? It was incomprehensible. And then, the ultimate retaliation. I demanded compensation from my husband and asked my mother-in-law to repay the money I had lent her with interest. The day the invoice arrived, an angry call came from my husband. "Hey, what is this? Why such a high claim?" "I am asking for compensation because of your infidelity. Please pay it soon." "There's no reason I should pay. That amount is insane. You don't even have any proof, do you?" "If you need proof, I have it. I've recorded all our recent conversations with your mom, and your admission of infidelity in those recordings will serve as evidence." "No way, you recorded it." "Yes, I couldn't trust you anymore. If necessary, I can access the condo building's elevator surveillance footage to identify the visitors, likely while I was working night shifts. Furthermore, I've been recording all our calls. Recently you said, 'This won't end here,' which could be considered a threat. I plan to claim additional compensation." "All right, it was a mistake. I won't contact you again." After that, he hung up and there was no more contact from him. Although my mother-in-law did reach out, expecting my husband would say something, I didn't respond. This decision backfired as she called repeatedly. Finally, when I answered, she screamed at me, "So you finally pick up, you terrible daughter-in-law." It seemed she hadn't received any information from my husband. "Listen, I have recorded this call and all recent calls. The fact that I lent you $2,000 and your acknowledgement of it are all recorded. Denying it now is pointless. Why not just pay me back honestly?" Hearing this, my mother-in-law ended the call without a word. Perhaps she realized that arguing was futile. For me, it wasn't about the money, it was about exacting revenge on these contemptuous family members. As a result, my husband lost the condo and had to return to his mother's house. After being ousted from the condo, it seems his affair partner also abandoned him. Despite reaching out to various people, including co-workers, clients, and business partners, the revelation of his infidelity damaged his reputation. He eventually lost his job and had to take up multiple part-time jobs at a much lower salary. This was the result of misusing his wife's money. He is now working day after day to pay the compensation, having lost his job and been deserted by his former lover. My mother-in-law, too, had to stop gambling and started working part-time to pay the compensation I demanded. Fortunately, the persistent contact from my husband and his family ceased, and I now enjoy peaceful days. With the night shifts fully staffed, I was moved to day shifts. During this time, the manager called me in. "I appreciate your support during the night shifts. You've really supported the store, thank you. the higher-ups have noticed, and there's an offer for a full-time position. How about taking this chance to work as a full-time employee? Transitioning from part-time work that I've been doing for a long time to a full-time position was a very welcome proposal. I feel young and the future looks promising, since I've risen from nothing with a middle school education to now being engaged in fulfilling work as a full-time employee. It's a surprise, Tanya. We're going with Mom. The confident voice of my husband echoed in the entranceway. While glancing at my happy husband and his mother, I couldn't contain my surprise. Naturally so. After all, this trip was our honeymoon, so it was natural to be shocked to hear that my husband planned to bring his mother along. Confused by my husband's statement, while I was thinking about what to say, he made a face like he was chewing on a bitter bug and voiced his dissatisfaction. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" he asked. There was no way I could be. He should have understood that. After all, there was a deep rift between me and his mother, which I had repeatedly complained about. His mother seemed unable to forgive me, the woman who stole her precious son. Every time she saw me, she would unleash obvious sarcasm. Especially troublesome was her act of being the perfect mother when my husband was around. Because of this, even if I expressed how difficult it was for me, my husband would not believe me. Still, it was clear that I had difficulties with his mother. Yet, to proceed with such a plan, what was he thinking? "Did you book Mom's plane ticket? Is the hotel reserved?" I asked, and my husband looked perplexed. "Eh? I thought I'd book it later." "That's impossible. When do you think we booked ours?" I raised my voice. Of course, there was no reservation for his mother. It was baffling for them to think of having her accompany us during the peak tourist season without a reservation. When I explained this point to him, he snorted as usual. "Then, could you give us all the tickets?" For a moment, I didn't grasp the meaning of his words and asked for confirmation, to which he repeated, displeased. "If there's no ticket for my mother, then give me yours. I paid for the trip, so I have that right." The smug face of my mother-in-law entered my field of vision, and I was shocked. I could only be astonished at her attitude. I cannot understand at all what he is thinking. This is not just a regular trip, it's our honeymoon. I can't believe he would plan such an important trip with his own mother. Of course, I would want to avoid even a normal trip with my mother-in-law. As I stood with my mouth open in surprise, my mother-in-law had a smug look on her face. She seems very pleased that her son is prioritizing her. "Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it," he says. Does he think that just because he paid, he can do whatever he wants? As I ponder this, the cost of the trip suddenly comes to mind. By the way, about the cost of this trip. My name is Tanya. I am 28 years old and work for a company run by my father. Initially treated as a nepotistic hire, my serious attitude and results were recognized, and gradually the people around me began to value me. Nevertheless, because of the fact that I am part of a business-owning family, malicious rumors are sometimes whispered, and occasionally they hurt my heart. In such a situation, my husband Glenn has been my support. We are the same age and have been exchanging opinions frequently as colleagues in the same team since we joined. It did not take long for our relationship to start. While Glenn efficiently handled his duties and contributed to improving performance, he was also trusted by my father. When we announced our marriage, my father immediately agreed. "Glenn, huh? I've heard about you. Take care of my daughter." "Of course, I'll make her happy," my husband replied. Watching that exchange, I felt the glow of the moment. At that time, my father was timing the future handing over of the company, and within the company, there was anticipation that Glenn might be the next president. He thought that the sudden marriage of his daughter could be a chance for generational change in the company. Although there was a possibility of entrusting the management to someone outside, having a capable son-in-law would surely have reassured my father. I am not good at putting myself forward, but if a competent son-in-law were to take over management, that would be the best outcome. I suppose that's what he thought. Although my father did not discuss this directly with us, we often talked about business management during meals together, so my husband and I anticipated that it would happen someday. My husband's father has already passed away, and his mother lives alone in her marital home. My husband deeply loves his mother, and during our courtship, if she called for help, he would rush to her immediately. Since she raised him alone, I have always supported, with a smile, my husband's desire to repay her. I think my husband, who can respect his mother like this, is a wonderful person. I was proud to be with such a person. However, since we got married and started living together, I have begun to feel more doubts. "I'm going to see Mom for a bit." This phrase has become my husband's standard line. And he visits his mother every week. "Is your mother unwell?" I ask with concern, but the answer that comes back is that she is not. "Tanya, don't worry about it. It's important to spend some time alone occasionally." Initially, he spoke kindly like that, but recently he has stopped showing such attitudes. On a Saturday morning, I spoke to my husband, who was cheerfully humming a song. "Are you going to your mother's house today?" The good mood changed instantly, and my husband stopped what he was doing and took a deep breath. "Why do you say it like that?" He reacted to my question with irritation visible on his face. Surprised, I shrugged my shoulders. I might have sounded accusatory without realizing it. It was already said. He glared at me and said, "Mom is lonely by herself. I'm going because you have difficulties with her, understand?" I couldn't hide my agitation at my husband's words. It's true that I have difficulties with my mother-in-law. Of course, it wasn't like that at first. She is the woman who brought my beloved husband into this world. I sincerely wish to cherish her. However, affection does not always come back equally from the other side. My mother-in-law saw me as the woman who stole her son. When my husband was away, starting from our first greeting, she would continuously throw cold words at me. The first incident happened right after my husband had gone to the restroom. Her friendly expression suddenly changed, and she scrutinized me from top to bottom, as if assessing my worth. "So, you are the president's daughter. You don't seem like much." Shocked by her words, I was surprised by the drastic change in my mother-in-law's attitude. She continued to spit venom. "You dare to show up here calmly after stealing Glenn from me. Don't misunderstand, I do not acknowledge you at all." Seeing my surprise, she snorted mockingly and made a crude slurping sound with her tea. It was as if it was natural that no tea was offered to me. Mother-in-law. Don't call me mother-in-law. It's unpleasant. I pondered why I had to be met with such hostility by someone I was meeting for the first time. But when I tried to speak up, I was immediately rejected by my mother-in-law. I felt helpless, and as I was confused by the situation, I heard my husband's returning footsteps. The drastically changed mother-in-law once again smiled and offered tea, as if she had forgotten what had happened earlier. "Sorry, I forgot to offer you tea," she said with a light laugh. And when my husband returned, she chuckled, "Mother, you hadn't served the tea yet." "Glenn, your fiancé is very charming." "Sorry for forgetting to serve the tea," said my mother-in-law with a smile. Then she added, "Tanya, don't hesitate to call me mother-in-law." A chill ran down my spine. Since then, my mother-in-law continues to throw harsh words at me only when my husband is not around. It's like she has a double personality. It seems that my husband cannot see her true nature. Even if I talk to him, he dismisses it with "my mother would never do such a thing." He says, "If you're that uncomfortable, you don't have to force yourself to meet her," and he doesn't believe me at all. Initially, I desperately appealed, but eventually, I grew tired of him defending his mother and began avoiding meeting her. Now, I only visit my in-laws' home when absolutely necessary. My husband might think I hate his mother. "Make sure to lock the door when you leave," he said, and today, as usual, he left without looking back. I tried to reach out, saying, "Wait," but missed him. His back blurred through my tears. After the conflict about his mother, he did not return home. There are moments when it feels like his mother is more important to him than I am. Aside from the issue with his mother, Glenn is a wonderful spouse. When I am having trouble with work, he quickly notices and helps, and he actively shares household chores. This is despite his own busy work schedule. It's a relief that he acknowledges there's no need for unnecessary meetings. Holding these thoughts, I browse through the travel brochures. I shake my head and decide to focus on the plans I currently have. It's the preparation for our long-awaited honeymoon. During this trip, I should be able to forget about his mother and have fun. At least, there won't be any sudden calls from my husband. I consider where to go, keeping in pace with my husband, who has just become the team leader for a new project. If possible, I would like to indulge in luxury on this occasion. While turning the pages and feeling tempted, I soon give up on that thought. I left all the preparations to you, so at least I want the payment to come from my account, my husband said. I had intended to pay for the honeymoon together, but he just laughed, not willing to listen. I thought it wasn't right for him alone to bear the entire cost, so I decided to pay for part of it myself. Additionally, being the president's daughter, the sarcasm from my mother-in-law, about being extravagant only escalates, which is tough. Thinking about it, I can't help but give a wry smile. Just when I had resolved to focus, thoughts of my mother-in-law invaded my mind again. Let's stop this, I tell myself, and to change my mood, I put the brochure aside and start preparing dinner for my husband, who will be back soon. Then the morning of our honeymoon arrived. As I was bustling with preparations, the doorbell suddenly rang. "Yes, come in," I said as I opened the door, only to be shocked by the sight before me. Mother-in-law. There she stood, dressed in flamboyant clothes with a large suitcase in tow. Noticing my voice, my husband peeked out. "Mom, you're early." While my husband greeted her with a smile, my mother-in-law didn't even glance at me. Unable to hide my confusion, I asked, "Early? What do you mean?" Just as we were about to leave for our honeymoon together, what could her large luggage imply? Could it be that she intended to stay at our house during our honeymoon? Tormented by this thought, my husband cheerfully announced, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming with us." Really? As my husband clapped his hands in joy, a strange sound escaped me in surprise. "What are you thinking?" I pressed. "Wait, what does this mean?" I asked in shock, and my husband declared happily, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming along." As I stood unable to hide my bewilderment, my husband proudly put his arm around his mother's shoulder, saying, "It'll be more fun with Mom along." Seeing this, my mother-in-law smiled smilingly at me. As I incredulously asked, "Wait a minute. Isn't a honeymoon supposed to be just for the couple? Shouldn't we at least have discussed this beforehand?" I tried to keep calm despite the confusion. Even as I was certain I wasn't wrong, my husband seemed to doubt my words. Why can't we understand each other? I wondered. Furthermore, my mother-in-law, seemingly enjoying my distress, hummed to herself. Why must such discord arise on the day we leave for our honeymoon? Doing something like this as a surprise, what were you thinking? I demanded angrily, to which my husband replied, "It's fine because I paid for everything, right?" Noticing my astonishment, he frowned. "No, it's not fine." Could it be that his offer to pay for the trip wasn't just to comfort me but to silence any objections about bringing his mother along? "Wait. That's not going to work," I objected, causing both my husband and mother-in-law to become visibly displeased. "Why won't it work?" my husband asked, and my mother-in-law childishly taunted, "Tanya doesn't want to travel with me, does she?" I felt a headache coming on. The issue isn't about that. "Glenn, what about your mother's plane ticket? Is the hotel booked?" I questioned, causing my husband to look perplexed. "Eh? I thought we could book it later." "That's impossible. When do you think we booked our tickets and hotel?" I raised my voice. Did he really think this could go smoothly without any planning? Though I tried to avoid luxury, the hotel we chose was decent. Especially now, during a major holiday period. There's no way the flights and hotels have availability now. As I pressed the issue, my husband naturally reached out. "Then, could you give me all your tickets?" For a moment, I couldn't grasp the meaning of his words and asked for clarification. to which he repeated, annoyed, "If there's no ticket for my mother, then give me yours. I paid for the trip, so I have the right to do that." The smug face of my mother-in-law entered my field of vision, and I was shocked. What's happening? What am I being told? My mother went through the trouble of preparing, so I've decided that this trip will be just her and me. We'll go with you some other time. That should be fine. The ease with which my husband favored his mother left me unable to follow. Does he think it's okay if I'm not there? I'll say it again. This is our honeymoon. Just for me and my husband. Being forced to hand over the plans to my mother-in-law, who appeared out of nowhere, is something I cannot accept. He says his mother prepared for it, but that doesn't matter. If he wants to maintain peace, his mother should step back. Yet, I was utterly dismayed as my husband continued to tell me to give up. "Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it," he says. Actually, I was going to keep this a secret. Suppressing a headache, I sighed deeply. Actually, my father is covering the cost of this trip, not you. So it's strange for you to demand the tickets, isn't it? Upon hearing this, my husband appeared bewildered, as if he couldn't accept the fact. That makes sense. He thought he had paid, which is why he could be so assertive. Why would your father do such a thing? He began to question in surprise. I stared at him coldly. My father decided to pay the honeymoon expenses as a gift so we could save up for our future. He had even told me to keep it a secret, considering my husband's pride. "Why did you keep this a secret from me?" my husband raged, his face turning red with anger. My mother-in-law, too, seemed shocked to learn that my father had funded the trip, and as I listened to my husband's angry voice, my heart rapidly cooled. I had endured my mother-in-law's nagging and my husband's bias towards her for too long, and I finally ran out of patience. "If you two want to go, then return the money to my father and cancel the reservations. Please arrange your own funding and start over." Ignoring my husband and mother-in-law's attempts to stop me, I quickly grabbed my bags and left the house. This was no joke. It was not right to use my father's money for people like them. Since I was busy and had been left to handle all the reservations, I had booked the flights and hotel in my name. Because of this, I was able to cancel everything swiftly and got into a taxi. Instead of heading to the planned airport, I gave the driver my parents' home address. When a daughter who was supposed to be on her honeymoon returned home with large luggage, my father was shocked. As I explained the situation, my father exploded in anger. "What is this story? Is this some kind of joke?" The constant calls from my husband only fueled my father's rage further. I was furious as well. This conversation cemented my decision. "Dad, I'm considering a divorce." When I conveyed my resolve, my father calmed his anger and comforted me gently. Without saying a word, he just gently stroked my back, letting me feel his warmth. "I'm sorry, Dad." As I let these words slip through my tears, my father firmly grasped my hand. The next day, my husband came to my parents' house with a box of sweets as an apology. Just as I was about to turn him away at the gate, my father intervened. "If you're considering divorce, we need to talk properly. Let's hear his true intentions directly. Let him in the house." While I had intended to consult a lawyer, I followed my father's advice and welcomed him. As soon as my husband saw my father at the door, he immediately apologized. I felt irritated at the sight of my husband pretending to be innocent in front of my father. As my husband continued to apologize, I sighed, and my father urged me to lead him to the sitting room. "President, I apologize for the inconvenience caused by this disturbance," my husband said, starting to apologize with his face down on the table, even before the greetings were over. Occasionally, even in private, my husband calls my father President. He used to joke that it had become a habit, but at the moments when he calls my father President, he seems to adopt a business-like attitude. Perhaps it's because he's used to it at work. His practiced way of apologizing was disturbingly perfect. "What is this apology for?" my father pressed, sighing repeatedly. His emotions were the same as mine. My husband just kept repeating, "I'm sorry for causing a disturbance." This was not an apology to me. It was just an insult. As my panicked husband tried to say something, I interrupted him and presented the divorce papers. "Do you know how to fill out these divorce papers? My part is already completed. Please refer to it." Speaking with deliberate politeness, my husband's face turned pale as he looked at the divorce papers. "Wait, Tanya, divorce." It felt like the first time since he arrived at the house that he actually looked at me seriously. I have always been second to him. "That should be fine, right? Glenn, you have your mother." If that is his attitude, I am also prepared to act businesslike and refuse any attempts at reconciliation. "What are you talking about? Why bring up my mother here? She was looking forward to that trip too. We can go on another trip together some other time, Tanya." Aghast at his lack of understanding, I retorted, "Any time? What does that mean? It was supposed to be our honeymoon." My body shook and I bit my lip in pain from the awfulness. Why would any husband want to bring his own mother on his honeymoon? Where in the world does that even happen? I asked myself, sickened by the thought. Yet, as if to worsen the situation, my husband stubbornly persisted. "It was just a suggestion to go together at first. Wasn't it you who said there were no flights or hotels available?" Glenn said. "Think about it. How could we possibly prepare for such a last-minute plan?" I replied, but it seemed like Glenn didn't understand at all. Unbelievably, he was serious. Glenn showed his anger openly and raised his voice. "Are you saying to send my mother back even though she was looking forward to this trip too?" At that moment, my father intervened and calmed the situation. "Let's end this now," my father said calmly, and after a silence, he shook his head in disappointment. "Glenn, I'm really disappointed," my father said, and Glenn suddenly called him president and straightened his posture. My father watched Glenn standing there with a gaze filled with deep sadness and disappointment. In the heavy silence, my father spoke. "Why did you choose your mother over Tanya in such a situation?" That question weighed heavily on Glenn. Searching for words, Glenn stammered, visibly sweating from nervousness. Even though Glenn could be assertive towards me at times, he could never defy my father. My father continued. A honeymoon is supposed to be for the couple. You could have gone with your mother any time after that, right? Wasn't it true when you said you loved my daughter? To this, Glenn shouted, I'm not lying. I just wanted to treat my mother as important as her. At this sudden outburst, my father looked sternly at Glenn for the first time. Even if it makes Tanya sad, is that okay? He pressed, and Glenn lost his words, stammering. Then, trembling, he said, I'm sorry, but his clenched hands clearly showed the humiliation he felt. His apology was because it was necessary, not because he truly thought the situation was wrong. He was apologizing because my father, the president, was angry, not because he felt the need himself. Glenn, you are a capable person, my father said, and Glenn momentarily showed a relieved expression, but soon realized he had misunderstood. My father's gaze was icy like a midwinter lake, piercing Glenn with increasing sternness. However, even if you are good at your job, a person who does not cherish their family can never be trusted, my father declared with a stern expression, emphasizing his words by attempting to hand a pen to Glenn. At this gesture, Glenn visibly shivered, showing signs of deep fear. Please wait. Please, let's avoid a divorce. I will change my heart, Glenn pleaded, continuing to refuse to take the pen. Seeing this, my father forcibly took his hand, made him grip the pen, and said sternly, You should not be apologizing to me. Shaken by these words, Glenn then turned to me, beginning to plead for help. Tanya, please do something. Please, anything but divorce, he said as he moved to my feet from my father, clinging to my legs and looking up imploringly. I will prioritize Tanya from now on, he vowed forcefully, but his words felt emptily hollow, as if his tears had already dried up. I could faintly sense the contempt for me hidden behind his words. Please. If we divorce, I won't be able to pay off the debts. Glenn blurted this out in panic. Confused, I asked, Debts? What are you talking about? Repeating the new information I had just heard. Then, suddenly recoiling from my feet, he covered his mouth and showed a look of regret. Overwhelmed by the situation, my father and I just silently stared at him. Amidst the tension, Glenn stuttered, well, and finally, gathering his resolve to speak to us, he began, So, it's about. When the shocking truth was revealed with his fearful demeanor, my father and I were so astounded that all we could do was hold our heads in disbelief. Incredibly, Glenn and his mother had been confident that the position of president was almost certainly theirs, and had been spending recklessly without any moderation. The reason he visited his mother's house almost weekly was also to enjoy a lavish lifestyle with her. The more I hear, the less I find any reason to keep this man as your husband, Tanya, my father said in disgust, too disappointed to find the words. Amidst this, Glenn finally pleaded earnestly, Please wait. If I am divorced, how am I supposed to live starting tomorrow? His continuous apologies, repeated over and over, looked almost mechanical, like a child's toy moving automatically, and were even comical in their desperation. That has nothing to do with us, I responded coldly, simply waiting for Glenn to sign the divorce papers. Deciding there was no value in further discussion, my father and I quietly decided to drink coffee. Naturally, we did not offer any coffee to Glenn. Though somewhat forcibly written, the divorce was finalized after all the legal procedures were successfully completed. The lawyer my father had hired was extremely capable, and my detailed diary greatly helped the negotiations, ensuring the process proceeded very smoothly. Additionally, when we claimed alimony, including the costs of the canceled honeymoon, there was a request from the other side, through their lawyer, for a reduction. However, my father immediately rejected that proposal, and I couldn't help but laugh when I heard his decision. As for Glenn, rumors of our divorce spread rapidly throughout the company, resulting in a complete change in the atmosphere around him, making it uncomfortable. Consequently, he decided to resign in haste. Since it was a resignation of his own volition, his severance pay was not substantial, and he ended up using all his modest savings to cover the alimony and his debts. As a result, he is now living a very modest life. Regarding his mother, she has fallen ill and is completely bedridden. It seems she's managing to get by with part-time jobs and has been contacting former colleagues for financial assistance, although the truth of these stories is uncertain. Now, these tales have become the subject of jokes at drinking parties. As for myself, my father has finally decided to retire from his position as president, and with substantial support from other employees, it is highly likely that I will take over as the next president. Although I initially hesitated to take on the role due to my discomfort with leading, my father's rare expression of vulnerability, wishing to entrust the company to someone reliable, has renewed my determination. I feel a responsibility to fulfill the expectation my father has placed on me. Initially reluctant, it seems I have inherited managerial talent from my father. Thanks to his continued support as chairman, our company's performance is gradually but steadily improving. With this newfound confidence, I have been increasingly approached at various events for CEOs. I have not yet considered starting a new romance, but a good time to start a new phase of life may be approaching.